Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of In Lay Terms. I'm your host, Payman Ascari, and today we have back with us my friend Melanie Bennet. How's it going?
I'm okay. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. It's a shame the internet gods are not smiling upon us today.
Fair enough. Well,
Let's
they
hope.
might be. They might be. We'll see. We'll see how it goes.
All right, let's hope for the best. And if something happens, apologies to anybody watching. Melanie, I wanted to get you on. I was following some of your tweets yesterday, your posts in light of what's going on in the UK. You're originally from the UK, if I'm not mistaken. I was hoping that you could maybe give your unique perspective on what's going on.
I'm not originally from the UK. Technically, I was born in Quebec, and I spent most of my life in the UK. I'm half English, and then I came back in 2017. Yeah, I came back in 2017, but not Quebec, the GTA. So I have a bit of a perspective on the UK. I'm very culturally British. I've been trying to be more culturally Canadian since I've been here. Um, but yeah, normally I have a channel called the Weekly Canadian Gender Wars Report, and we talk about gender ideology. I focus a lot on queer theory and how that presents itself in school, and that's what we spoke about last time I came on your show. And a lot of the issues around critical theory and postmodernism and Marxism and how that presents in the education system and higher education. But I have been so distracted with what has been going on in the UK over the past couple weeks. I have become consumed with watching what's been going on there, because I'm seeing so much of the problems we have in Canada over there, but present in a very different way, with the kind of issues that are more British in terms of some of the tensions around the Muslim community. In the early 2000s, certainly after 9/11, there was a lot of terror threats and the ability to talk about radical Islamism. And people were able to do that. The media was able to do that. Politicians spoke about it. It wasn't a taboo subject, although maybe there was a little bit of sensitivity around talking about it, because there was wanting to make a distinction around regular moderate Muslims and radical Islamists. But you could certainly talk about it. I even remember many documentaries from mainstream journalists, talking about some of the madrasas and some of the issues that were going on in some of these radical communities. So this wasn't a taboo issue. And I went about my life, my business, and I knew that there was definitely a radical Islamist problem in the UK, but I forgot all about it, came here, and then I became consumed with woke stuff here. So I didn't really see the rise of this identity race politics in the UK. I think I saw maybe a little bit of it when I left, but it wasn't really huge in 2017. And now it seems to have consumed the country, where I saw an interview today with I think he's an ex-Labour MP, a young, is he Labour MP? He's just an ex-MP, and he's more of a conservative speaker now, but he just happened to mention that there were these I guess mobs of Muslim men gathering in a vigilante sort of way in Birmingham, and it was in response to what he called ethnic English. And the newscasters couldn't handle this idea of ethnically English. They were up in arms. We don't say this in this country. We don't talk like that. We don't talk like that. There's no ethnically English. We're kind of past that sort of mentality. And I think that's kind of describing my shock really at the minute, because here in Canada, it is a land of immigrants, right? For the most part, there's, maybe some European people that have been here with their families for centuries or whatever. But generally speaking, I mean, it's pretty much a land of immigrants. Take that or leave that. That's kind of true. So this idea of we're a nation of immigrants works here. But this idea over there that seems to have taken hold, that they are a nation of immigrants and always been a nation of immigrants, and calling yourself ethnically British, that not being okay is absolutely shocking to me. I don't know if you've been following. Did you follow what happened in Birmingham yesterday at all?
You know what? Like, I don't look into details to what's happening. I just saw the Muslims running around with machetes and hammers, and then there's white Brits I don't know, attacking a place where there was Muslims?
Yeah, well, in the past, there have been emergencies in the country. Obviously, countries go through things, and throughout my time in the UK, politicians would try to de-escalate a situation, de-escalate an emergency in the country or a tense situation. I mean, even during the BLM riots, the police essentially, well, you saw pictures of them kneeling. I mean, that was a thing in BLM, just very similar to Canada and America, trying to lend a hand or trying to extend a favor or trying to understand what's going on. And so there's a lot of trying to de-escalate a situation in that way. But in this case, it seems like every single step they're trying to escalate the situation. So if I take you a step back, there's been very well, even in the recent past, over the last few weeks, there have been many riots in the country, burning down cities. Well, let's start with Hare Hills. There's a place near Leeds called Hare Hills, and there were some children who were taken away by the children's services. There was some abuse in the family. These children were taken away, but the community there decided to riot, and they burnt the city down to a crisp. I think they burnt emergency vehicles or even police vehicles. The police ran away. There was no response to that at all. I think there was a stabbing by an illegal immigrant. A soldier was stabbed for being a soldier, and I think that was pretty much ignored by the political class. And then these girls, who were going to a yoga class, which I'm sure you might be aware of, were attacked by, a man. He was born in Wales, but his parents were from Rwanda, and this is kind of part of the debate on the whole situation. But he went with a blade to a yoga class and just attacked these girls. And so 3 girls in Southport were murdered, 8 in critical condition, with 2 adults also in critical condition. So I can't tell you the state of the people who are still injured because there's no coverage in the media at all about that. But that's what sparked this all off. But not only that, it wasn't the fact that these girls were killed by a guy from Rwanda, although people talk about stuff on social media. I was following it at the time. The people of Southport went to a vigil, and it was a peaceful vigil. Many people from the community were there. There was a lot of people on social media putting these posts. I put my face up on a post saying, "I'm a far-right thug, Keir Starmer," right? But was that afterwards? No, I think that was afterwards. The point is that the riots began when this person came around, this male came around with a machete shouting, "Allahu Akbar." And that's what sparked off the riots in Southport. And as we have all seen, I'm sure, cities on fire all over the north. I put out a post saying, I don't think people understand the scale of what's going on in the UK. It's funny how so many people interpreted that as a Muslim thing. But what I meant is the amount of places, physical places, the geographic scale of the things that of what's going on in the UK. It's across the board in different towns across the north, all over the weekend, right? So they just popped up all over the place in response to some of this stuff that's going on. But it's become so focused on this idea of right-wing thuggery when I don't know how to come into the situation, but I'm not entirely convinced that this is simply a question of politics or right-wing at all.
Can I jump in? And
yeah, please.
Let's start with a question. How much of this is about race? How much of this is about, let's call it, just assume Islam is a race. How much of this is about this open borders thing where they've changed the demographics of the country?
I think it's becoming increasingly sectarian in that way. I think the conflicts are becoming, it's not so much race, but religious. The Muslim community in the UK do seem to have preferential treatment by the government. You heard Keir Starmer come out immediately saying we're protecting the Muslim community after all of this stuff was sparked off by a guy coming around saying Allahu Akbar. Now, I'm not saying which one is right and which one is wrong, but one group is being protected and the other group is being tarred and feathered as the enemy. That's the shocking thing from Keir Starmer. I've never seen a politician in a situation like this seem to escalate this kind of ethnic, the English ethnic, I think, and religious tension, pitting 2 groups against each other. One is the enemy of the government and the other isn't. So I think because of that stance, the riots across the north essentially sparked, people got really, really angry. So how much of this is it racial? I think it's more religious. And I think it does have a big part to play. But don't forget, regardless of the riots, there are millions of people in the country who have serious issues with immigration because knife crime, and when I say knife crime, I mean machetes, swords, like big knives, has become a massive problem in the UK. You know, you have a lot of illegal immigrants who get into gang fights on the street with these machetes, and a number of people are being killed and injured by this street violence, and it's seemingly not being addressed by the government. So a lot of this is playing into the tensions, and these people are trying to tell the government, trying to tell their officials, trying to engage with this. They're peaceful. These are not the rioters, by the way, right? Then they're not being heard, and this has been going on for quite a long time. And so in this situation, when something just sparks everything off, these 3 little girls getting murdered, and still the government is not taking any notice, and we haven't even talked about grooming gangs, like that's a whole other thing, right? I think that's what kind of sparked all this off. I think there's a lot of very, very angry people.
And again, I was following your posts. You used the word class. You said this is a lot to do with class. How does class tie into this?
So I looked at it, occurred to me when I started noticing the places that were rioting. Because at first there were people who were gathering in protest, peaceful protest. They were still being called far right, but they weren't the far right thugs yet. It wasn't far right thuggery, it was just the far right. And they were peaceful. They wanted to gather. They're tired of the issues around immigration. They're tired of the violence on their streets. They're just people like us, people like freedom. You know, you're freedom movement, aren't you? People who did freedom movement stuff. I do parental rights. So they're kind of people like you and me. But the actual riots were in places like Middlesbrough, Liverpool, Hull, Hartlepool. These places I know very well because I lived in Middlesbrough 4 years. That's why I went to college before I went to go to university. And the amount of economic deprivation that I saw in Middlesbrough was shocking to me. The amount of squalor, poverty, multi-generational poverty, where people don't really have jobs. There's no industry. All the industry was taken away several decades in the past. So maybe they're poor and can't imagine a future. Their parents were in the same position, their grandparents. And there's a lot of sort of gangy stuff that happens around those situations. I remember, again, in the early mid 2000s, just watching these gangs of youths steal people's bikes and beat them up on the street in Middlesbrough. You would see towns full of houses with the roofs falling in, but people still living in them. People not being able to get so-called council housing, not being able to get jobs. You know, there's problems with alcoholism, with drugs, with prostitution. They're just really, really deprived areas. And that was never addressed. It was never addressed the entire time I lived. But this is not even the working class. This is, I would call it almost like an underclass of benefits class of people that kind of exist out of the bounds of respectability, right? And there's such a hatred for these people in the country that I think a lot of the reason, like if we go to the grooming gangs, for example, I think a lot of the reason these grooming gangs carried on for so long is because they're often these people that were targeted, these girls that were targeted by these groups, these gangs, right? The underclass girls that nobody cares about, that are in care or just, you know, have poor family lives and have issues at home. So there's like a lot of socioeconomic issues associated with this situation that were left unaddressed for such a long time. And now it seems that to these people often that the government is then protecting the people that are, when they say people taking their homes, taking their jobs, it's not just middle-class people who have bricklaying jobs who are taken away from them or anything like that. Like these people are literally being, the illegal immigrants are now being sent to these areas and given homes where they've, you know, had multi-generational, decade after decade of their families not being able to, or barely being able to scrape a living. So I'm not condoning the riots. I think they're not going to help themselves. Like this is not going to help the situation. In fact, it's going to hand everything to the government if they want to, you know, impose some kind of authoritarian control on the country. But I can understand why a lot of this kicked off in the way that it did in the places that it did in the North.
Melanie, I'm going to say something. You can agree with me. You can disagree with me. You can pick it up and run
Yeah.
with it. My view is that you have these cities, and let's just call the rich people in the cities. They're passing policy, in this case, immigration, and then the immigration impacts these people in the towns, the more poor people. And when they stand up and they complain, they get shouted down and they're called racist.
Yes.
Take it away.
Well, that's exactly what's going on, right? But it's the average Brit despises these people so much because it's not just working, it's underclass. So the working class will be like the builders and the posties and all this stuff. Everyone hates the underclass, the benefit class. So they're happy to call them racists and thugs because, I mean, I've seen it myself. I've seen them engage in, unsavory behavior. But for the last 20 years, I don't think anything has really been done to help these communities better themselves after all these industries were taken away. So on top of that, you put all of this immigration on top, then, people get a bit radicalized, they have low education. What's really surprised me though, is this seems to be moving to the South, which is not something that I expected. So we'll see how this develops. But if it does move into the South, I think the UK has some problems.
Sorry, you're gonna have to break that down for us. The global South, what South UK?
No, the South of the country. So the North and the South are kind of distinct. Well, I guess you have the Midlands as well, but the North is typically pretty poor. It has some nice places, and it's not poor everywhere, but it has a lot of the worst of the poverty in the North, very concentrated. And that was from, like I said, industry being taken away. This is a long-standing issue, and people in the South are generally a bit more well-off, a bit more middle class. Right? So it's not just cities, towns. It's also cities, towns in the South and cities, towns in the North. They're very distinct. That's why everything popped off in the North. The poorest of the poor up North, who were probably the most fed up, really kicked off over the weekend. And now it was Birmingham. Birmingham is what kicked off yesterday. That's Midlands. But as I understand, Birmingham has a very, very high percentage of the Muslim, very high percentage Muslim. I don't know exactly what the number is.
I want to come to that in a second, but when you say the underclass, I'm going to use a phrase I think you guys use. We're talking about chavs, council housing,
Yeah,
environment?
pretty much. Yeah, that's exactly it. Scallies, chavs. Well, they call them chavs in the South and scallies in the North, but it doesn't matter. Yeah, they're not. Yeah, people just hate them viscerally, and you kind of saw that. There was a ex-police Met Police chief, I heard in a clip today, essentially express that hatred. He was saying all these far-right people, well, they're probably not even political and they probably can't even spell far-right. And he says it in that comment that he's calling them far-right, but he knows they're probably not even political and they're not very well educated. And these are the chavs, as you say. So I found that really interesting to hear. And I think most people will go over their head, even in the country, because I had to come to a lot of this awareness by getting away from the country. So this, I realized, was a bit of an advantage in some ways because, like I had to leave my leftist circle in the UK to realize what woke was by moving here. I was isolated from all those people, right? All my friends, family. So I had to adjust and face kind of this leftism in a very real way. But also I've been away from the UK for a long time now, and I'm sort of re-looking at some of these issues and realizing how how even in the UK people completely ignore some of the most obvious problems.
Going back to the concept, the issue with chavs, I shouldn't use that word, but this underclass.
Well, you can call them chavs. I mean, it's probably better than underclass. I didn't know you need chavs. That's why I use that word.
Well, then they don't like when you call them that, but I find like there's a serious breakdown of the family unit. Like there's no discipline. There's these kids running around. Like the number of stories online about gang rape culture. These are not. This is not a. Are they being lumped in as far right now?
Yes. So what I saw was basically chavs rioting. That's looting shops, setting fire to things. That's basically what I saw. There might have been some politically far right people there inciting some of it. I don't know. It's a possibility that, who knows? But what I saw in those videos was chavs, right? Like you said, there's social issues, family breakdown, poverty, all the everything associated with drug use and drug dealing and prostitution. Like all of these things are very real. Doesn't excuse it.
I'm trying to, again, I was at a conference over the weekend, so I'm a little bit behind on this, but it seems like there's multiple things going on. You have, let's call them the working class. They've been disenfranchised and they're angry. And then you got these looters. Let's just call the underclass the looters.
Everybody's getting lumped as the looters.
Yeah, but it's not that they're being lumped as looters. They're taking these two classes and they're lumping as something called far right.
Yes, that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing the looters are the chavs, right? But then you have the so-called far right, which is people like you and me, average mums and dads, or people just average. They're not even all Brits. You know, I have all kinds of people who have problems with what's going on in the country right now and seeing the destruction of their culture and their towns. They're being lumped into this far right. Yes. And I think part of that is politically expedient.
Okay, let's use that as a launch pad for another thing that you said. You think this is going to lead to censorship more so than bringing in the military?
Well, I don't know. At first I thought, oh my God, this is going to turn into martial law. You never know what's going to happen if these protests continue. Apparently, it looks like tomorrow is going to be something to watch because there could be a lot of actual left versus right stuff going on tomorrow. Who knows? We'll see. But do I think martial law at this point? Not really. No, I don't think there's going to be something like that. But it seems to me that it seems politically expedient, and I keep seeing the journalists, broadcasters, and politicians and police chiefs blaming social media. It keeps coming back over and over and over again. And so and also a veiled threat to Elon Musk in one of Keir Starmer's addresses. So I'm thinking they're going to try to make a move on serious censorship.
Sorry, I'm laughing at this. I don't know where that is. Birth of Chaff.
Kent is southeast.
Oh, yeah. What was the veiled threat to Elon Musk? Sorry.
Well, Keir Starmer didn't come out and say X is the enemy, but he was basically saying those social networks that allow this far right to bubble. It was kind of a veiled threat to X. And then there's been a lot of talk about how bad X is and how all of this far right extreme people are being radicalized by social media. I think they're going to go for some censorship, not just the social media. I think they're going to use this for serious censorship. Because look, the narrative is falling. People have been sold something. They keep voting to not have this thing, right? Not having all this immigration. And it just keeps happening. Politicians keep gaslighting them and saying it's fine. Like just now, there's no room in prisons. I have a friend who's in Bristol who works with rehab people who are going through rehab, and so she deals with sort of prison stuff. And she was explaining to me that there's no room in prisons. They're letting people out early. They're doing like 40% of their sentences and get sent home on remand. And she's like, there's no room. And so I told her, well, apparently they're making all this room, like 500 new places are being made, and she's like. She was absolutely baffled by how they're going to fit all these new people in. And so that also asks questions like, why is it that they can make room and also start this 24-hour court thing? So after these protests, Keir Starmer came out and said, well, now we have 24-hour courts, so we can process these people really, really, really fast. Well, why wasn't he processing any of the street crime with machetes so fast, right? Why are we not doing this for all of the reason that these people are protesting in the first place? So it does raise a lot of questions. So there's something politically expedient right now, because all of a sudden, when push comes to shove, oh, look, there's room in prisons. Everybody's getting processed real fast. So they can act. They're just choosing to act in a very two-tier way, shall we say.
We have a question from the audience. Canuck Saram. How many of Britain's present political oligarchy are disciples of Blair's third way, where policy forms values rather than vice versa? Are you able to answer that?
I'm not. So this is the thing. Like, I'm not some kind of political pundit, right? I don't know the ins and outs of Blair. I certainly was not a fan of Blair. I couldn't tell you. I couldn't answer that question personally. It seems to me, though, that leftism in general for a long time does seem to be, you have this ideal of what you think the world should be, and you're not dealing in how the world actually is. And instead of dealing in how the world actually is, you keep doing things for that ought to be, right? And at the minute, now we're vilifying anyone who's going, hey, that's not working. And it seems to be stoking. And he said, I don't know if that answers that question in that way. But yeah, we're certainly not, I don't think we're living in reality.
I think it's like that, we'll get socialism right this time. mentality.
yeah.
Um,
Fake it till you make it.
going back to the Elon Musk thing, like they, they probably will use this. It seems like this is their strategy on the left. Like, let's just vilify the right and let's just try to ram through our policies and get more censorship.
Yeah, well, back to how things ought to be. Like, this is the vision of what I think the world should be. And my narrative is, so I'm speaking as the liberal or labor or whatever. I believe that this is what the world should be for whatever reason. And instead of actually dealing with how the world actually is, well, I'm just going to keep, and my world is crumbling. They're losing control right now. It's obvious. Well, instead of actually dealing with reality, what we're going to do is we're going to censor them because they have the incorrect, like they're spreading misinformation, that stuff that they're saying, instead of listening. So he could have de-escalated by actually engaging with the peaceful community of people who had any issues, but it keeps escalating. Keeps escalating, keeps falling apart. People are getting angrier. This thing is getting stoked. Well, what are we going to do if people don't do what we're telling them they should believe? Well, we'll just put in more censorship, because the gaslighting that I have seen by the media has been unbelievable. In Birmingham yesterday, there, so just to describe quickly, I think we've gone over it, but I'll just mention it again. There were gangs of hundreds of masked, some armed Muslim men defending their communities. And they attacked a guy in a pub, and they were attacking cars. You know, they had the idea that there was going to be protests. Well, a police person, somebody went up to a policeman and asked, why aren't you, there was no police, by the way. So they asked the police, why weren't you present over there with all this stuff going on? And the police officer said, well, our intelligence tells us that it's fine. There's nothing going on over there. We've had discussions with this community. There's nothing going on. So not only were they not there, but they didn't even bother to show up when this guy was telling, well, there's stuff going on over there, right? And then in the paper, the Telegraph, I think it was, and this is supposed to be a Tory paper, a conservative paper, I guess. The headline at midnight was essentially that these gangs were just driven by misinformation. They were just misled. Okay, I couldn't read the article because it was behind a paywall. And then this morning, it's the same thing. They're sort of running cover for a narrative. There was I think the Birmingham police chief, there was a clip of him even saying the same thing. What happened yesterday in Birmingham? And his explanation was, well, we'd spoken to the Muslim community. We know the people that were involved. They assured us that they were just there to protect their neighborhoods, and that it was fine for us not to show up. So it was basically, trust me, bro, we got this.
I don't know if you remember yesterday, I sent you, I did a post. I said, mostly peaceful thugs. It's the same thing
Mostly
again.
peaceful thugs. Well, that describes it. And I think that's the two-tier policing that people are complaining about. Can you imagine if a group of England defenders, or whatever you want to call, like if it's viewed as far right, can you imagine the police going to talk to them? There's thousands of them, by the way, right? There was hundreds of thugs, but there were thousands of males defending in this area. Can you imagine if they did that with thousands of England defenders saying, dude, trust me, bro, we got this. We're, no worries. You don't need to be here. We don't need you. We'll protect our own communities. And we saw videos over the last few days of several police engaging with Muslim leaders, I guess. And the Muslims were telling the police, we don't need you. We appreciate that you want to protect us, because Keir Starmer says it's all about protecting one group. We appreciate that you want to protect us, but we don't need you. We can protect ourselves. And so I've seen many clips of Muslims telling the police, we can protect ourselves. So it's almost like the Muslim community in the UK have become their own protection service, and the police are just, okay, trust you.
Just to get ahead of the arguments that they'll say against Melanie Bennet, the savage racist, sort of, what the insults they're going to hurl at you. Could this possibly be a case of right-wing people, again, overreacting? Like, was this just one isolated incident of a couple of Muslims with plastic machetes or something? Like, is it at all defendable?
What, the attacks yesterday?
No, I mean, like, could you say that this is a misunderstanding? They're deliberately trying to paint all these Muslims as psychopaths, or were they literally running around with machetes?
Well, okay, so I obviously, I really don't think that it is the vast majority mobbing, just like I don't think it's the vast majority of England defenders rioting. I don't. It's obvious because the sheer amount of people out in Birmingham yesterday, I mean, it actually, well, it's still a sizable portion, but it's hard to. I think it seems to me from the Muslim community, they see themselves as defending their communities and their mosques, and it seems to me that they're emboldened in their actions based on some of the things that both the police are saying, i.e., you say it's fine, we trust you, bro, and also the prime minister saying those far right thugs are the problem, they're the enemy, and we'll protect you. So you have one side who's angry at being treated like the enemy, and the other side emboldened that they have all the protection. So, I mean, I don't. Sort of off topic. Do I think that it's well? I don't know. Can you say the Muslim situation is far right? Like they're probably more far right than the so-called far right. I don't know.
If I was going to draw an analogy, this is like the summer of love, where the law enforcement basically gave the green light for the protesters to burn the cities down. In this case, the Muslims would be the Antifa BLM sort of, you got the green light, whereas the other side, the MAGA supporters, like they will come after them with the full force of the law.
Well, it's hard not to think that. If you look at what happened in Hare Hills, to a crisp, it's burned down to a crisp, and the police were not really around. It's hard. It's very, very difficult not to see very clearly this idea of two-tier policing. And Keir Starmer coming out multiple times saying, no, there's no two-tier policing. Also, the courts minister coming and saying out there's no two-tier policing, right? The gaslighting is anyone with eyes and an X account can clearly see that there is two-tier policing.
Why do you think this goes into intent? Why do you think the police are engaging in two-tier policing? Do you think it's they're just bad people, or is it just top down and they're just cogs in the machine?
I don't know, but I can't I can't speak for the police. I can only speculate, and in my speculation, they're probably afraid of being called racist. That's what I really think it is. There was a ex-police chief that was on the BBC. Was it yesterday? This is a clip that went around, and he was trying to explain to the BBC presenter that we're inflaming tensions when we should really be de-escalating, and we're calling all these people far right when that's not really what's going on. And he was trying to basically level the playing field, and he got cut off by the BBC presenter, and they just shifted, get rid of him. So it's hard to believe that the BBC has not received their narrative orders, and this man was not engaging in the narrative of, black versus white, us versus them. He was saying, look, let's look at what's actually going on here. Oh, we can't have that. So he got rid of him real quick, and that's been going around. So I don't know. I'm finding it very, very difficult to think that there isn't a narrative, and two, everyone working extra time to make sure that everyone's adhering to this narrative and stoking whatever it is that's going on.
Is your BBC as morally corrupt as our CBC?
Oh yeah. I mean, after what I've seen over the last few days, I would say, yeah, the same, if not worse. I knew that several years ago, but I think it's just completely corrupt now. The way that police officer got cut off and removed as quickly as possible was just shocking, really. I don't know that I've seen something like that. Well, I don't watch CBC, so maybe I wouldn't see something like that on CBC. They're bad. Our medias are paid for. Like, that's ridiculous. I cannot wait. I don't know. I'm hoping the one positive thing that could come out of this situation is that many, many more average people in the UK see through the lies, because the gaslighting is so blatant that it would take either people who are just not paying attention at all, not looking at social media at all, not engaging with anything, and living in certain areas that are not affected. Could you not figure out that there's something a little bit fishy?
Okay, let's pull on that thread. What about London, like downtown metropolitan London? Do you think are they completely detached from all these other poor towns?
Oh yeah, but London is kind of a city state, isn't it? London is it's almost another country. They are detached.
I guess that's my question to you. Like, are these the people that would just buy whatever the BBC says?
I don't know about that. So I can't really answer questions about London specifically because I avoid London like the plague.
I hate that place. I hate it so much. That's the underground. Everything about it I hate.
I hate everything about London as well, and everything I hate about London is probably increased substantially since I left. So yeah, I stay as little as possible there. I think the remaining people who are still in London, who are not new immigrants or native British, if you will, are probably incredibly woke because you would have to be to stay there because it's essentially becoming different ethnic areas, I guess. I know a lot of people have left. Even before I left the UK, there were Londoners who were leaving in droves. Like I lived in Bristol as well in the southwest, and so many people were moving to Bristol from London. So there was a London flight for a while.
I've been like 2 areas in London that are just like they're become ghettos. Like one is Marble Arch. It's just purely Arab. And then you have Brick Lane, which is purely East Indian. Like, why would you? I wouldn't go there if I was a white person. It's weird.
I mean, we have Brampton. I live in an area. I won't say. I was going to say where I live. I live in an area that is predominantly one ethnicity in the GTA. I think the GTA is pretty much like that.
The Greater Toronto area, like outside of downtown Toronto, you mean?
Yeah. I mean, it seems pretty ghettoized. There's definitely like Iranian neighborhoods and Chinese neighborhoods and, Indian neighborhoods. I don't think it's as ghettoized. And I'm not sure that that's necessarily as widespread, but in the UK, speaking of London ghettoization, that's pretty much the case all over the UK. So, you'll have immigrant neighborhoods, right? But they'll be like ethnically, well, especially when it comes to the Muslim community. So you'll have areas that are entirely full of Pakistani people.
Let's leave Canada behind. By the way, in case anybody's wondering, I am fading. I just got out of a flight yesterday. But I kind of wanted to leave let's leave Canada behind. Like how much of this fear, let's call it, of Islam, or mostly foreigners, but like this fear of Islam is justified? How much of it is irrational? Because you can make an argument either way. Like England it's a Christian country.
I'll tell you my view on it. I do not believe that the vast majority of people who practice Islam are going to cause terrorist threats. I don't. I think that there's some questionable things about Islam. But one of the things that I find very curious that I cannot shake is that in the UK right now, you see in the native British population, a large part of that population is saying we're having problems with Islam and causing issues, and there's some racism going on. And then you have another huge part of the native population who's doing Antifa stuff and who's doing pro-immigration stuff and who's denouncing the actions of the far right and denouncing all those other native British people and saying they're not representing England. So you see that within the native British population. You see that in Canada too, among, I guess, the European population or native Canadian, well, as native Canadian as possible. What I never see among the Muslim communities is that while they will, I've seen a lot of videos at the minute of them telling other Muslims who are gathering to protect their areas, don't fight, don't wear masks, don't bring weapons, right? But what I'm seeing is them saying, those far-right EDL thugs want you to get angry. They're saying, don't make us look bad. But what they're never, ever saying is, those people are doing disgusting things and we don't like those people, and like those people should be denounced. Do you know what I mean? Like there's a difference. All they're doing is protecting themselves and their reputation. They're not actually denouncing the actions. That's what I find curious. And I've never seen that kind of denouncing. I just see that self-preservation that I don't necessarily see in native British people. Well, I'm just saying in the population as a whole. So I'm going to remain. I always had suspicions about Islam the entire time I was in the UK, because there have been a lot of terrorist attacks. This ISIS thing that happened in Toronto recently, I was shocked because I thought I would expect that in UK. I didn't expect that in Canada. So I've always been suspicious. I have an open mind, But until I actually see the communities denouncing these actions properly, I am going to be suspicious.
Here's another one. I don't know if you know a guy named Mike Benz. He goes by Mike Benz
Yeah.
Cyber. So he's a cybersecurity guy, and he's got this theory on democracy, and he says that the definition of the word democracy has been redefined from the will of the people to the democratic institutions that perpetuate democracy. So, how do you think that we could say that's happening here, where the will of the people is saying we need to reduce immigration, but those democratic institutions like the NGO and the UN, they're saying no, 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 these people are attacking us, therefore they're actually the enemy of democracy.
Well, that's exactly what is going on.
Nice. I like it when people
The
agree with me.
managerial class, as we call them, the managerial and political class have decided this is what we want, so we're going to make it happen. The people in the UK keep saying we don't want this. I mean, the amount of political disengagement, rightly or wrongly, apathy in the UK, because it's not just this Labour government; it's the previous, however long, seemed like forever, of the Tories, and then before that, it was the Blair government. None of them cared about what the people had to say. None of them have been paying attention. It's all been these imposed ideas onto the people. I mean, so it does seem to me that it's these democratic entities telling us what we should do, or perpetuating what you call the democracy rather than the will of the people, right? Yeah, I think you're spot on. I think it's a very good way of looking at it.
I guess the credit goes to Mike Benz, but I think the way he phrased it, he said it's an inversion of democracy.
Yeah. Well, how do we fix it?
That was going to be my next question. Somebody earlier on in the comments, I forget who it was, apologies, but they asked, like, is there a peaceful solution out of this?
Well, it feels to me the peaceful solution would have to be firstly coming from Keir Starmer calming down the situation. But I don't see that happening. So absent that, it's down to the people. So we'll see what happens over the coming days. But I think people are behaving like I think it's mob behavior right now, or even mob thinking, even if you're not participating in a riot. It's almost like everyone's trying to fall into a group think of some kind. And I'm guilty of that too. I've definitely fallen on the side of the native British in this situation, even though I'm trying to keep a bit of a perspective. But what was it that was happening during COVID? It was mass formation,
Mass
wasn't that?
formation psychosis?
Yeah, mass formation psychosis. It almost feels like a bunch of people are falling into these different these different camps of mass formation psychosis over their different political views. Like on the difference between Wednesday, or what I expect to see tomorrow, compared to what we've seen, is that it's kind of been native British against Muslim mobs to date. You've seen a little bit of the Antifa types, the social justice warriors, shall we imagine. You've seen a little bit of that, like in Plymouth in the South, for example, facing off against the so-called far right. Like you've seen a little bit of that, but I think that's going to be a big part of tomorrow, and I think there's going to be some clashes among the two different factions if we're going to see violence. So how do you bring peace to these two groups? They're not talking to each other. They absolutely hate each other. This has been going, I mean, Brexit. I remember when I left the UK after Brexit, because I was one of those lefties. I was like, all of those people, those people on the right, they're just misogynistic, racist, blah, blah, blah. They don't, and I had a sense of superiority, and I'm ashamed of that now, because that's not what was going on. I understand it now, but I think that certainly amplified. So even in 2016, we learned to hate half of the country. And I'm not sure that that's changed. I'm not sure that that's improved. Right? So unless people can learn to actually put this ridiculous, like, we don't need to politicize everything. We can just talk to one another. Until that happens, I'm not sure how this resolves.
Yeah, I agree. I find people have lost their minds, and like we saw it first with the left, and they went crazy. But now I am seeing it with elements on the right.
Yeah, same. Yeah. My
I'm
understanding
coming
of the
to you.
situation too is that the institutions, whether it's corporate, whether it's political, whether it's media, kind of like in Canada, it's become very, very left. And because right equals evil, it equals all the bad things. If you say you're on the right or express an opinion that may be considered right, well, you can't express that in the office. You might get in trouble. So it's the same there, right? So but half the population chose Brexit to leave the European Union. So you're telling me that half of the country feels that they cannot speak up at work. So Eric Kaufman wrote a book, The Third Awakening, which I've just finished, and he describes some of these patterns that have been going on in several Western countries and in the UK as well, obviously. And he's describing it there. It's like half the country feels that they can't actually express their opinions in polite society. So how is that not going to radicalize people, right? How is that not going to cause further losing of minds?
Yeah, I hear you. Melanie, I'm going to give you the opportunity to show off your academic skills. Somebody's asking a question about something called Fabians and having penetrated the government of the UK. I don't know what a Fabian is.
Fabians are socialists. So the Fabian socialists, I think, are from the 1800s, and it's a British thing. So whereas, because you have lots of different kind of socialists, these are the slow guys. They didn't believe in revolution. They don't believe in that. They believe in working with the government slowly over time to bring about change, like over 100 years, right? So they're not the revolutionary, want everything now. Like what's happening in Bangladesh, that's not these people. And they've been in the government in the UK for a very, very long time. But for example, Labour is essentially a socialist group. So there'll be a lot of Fabians in Labour. Why? Because Labour is trade unionist. It is a socialist party. We forget that. We think it's just a liberal party and the other one's a not liberal party, but it is a socialist party. So in the UK, really, you have socialists versus liberals, which is the Conservative Party, right? So Fabians are just slow moving. I think was it wolves in sheep's clothing is their logo, which says a lot about the Fabians. That and a turtle, I think it is, or a tortoise. Yeah, we could go a long time about Fabians. I need to learn more about the Fabians. I've been getting a little bit more into that recently. I don't know the depth of it. I do know that Pierre Trudeau was a Fabian socialist.
Was or is?
Well, Pierre Trudeau is dead, isn't he?
Oh, sorry. I was thinking about Pierre Paul. Sorry, again, exhausted.
Well, you can imagine that his son would probably be influenced with that. But you see that Fabian socialist tendency with his admiration for certain dictators, senior and junior.
Was it you that you had a T-shirt that said anti-communist?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've come out and now I'm like openly anti-communist now.
I think it's I don't hate a lot of people. I think it's okay to hate communism.
They're not people.
Correct. Well, it's okay to hate ideas. Yeah. You know what? It's funny because like I am staunchly anti-communist or anti-communism for the most part. I think a lot of communists are insufferable, frankly. But I've met because I study how this Marxism stuff happens or presents itself in the education system. I've had the opportunity to meet some communists who are not of the woke variety. If you can imagine, there's a lot of communists who are not woke, who are actually kind of annoyed with all of this woke stuff because to them, so communists are normally what's called materialist. So they believe in your feet are on the ground in material reality, whereas a lot of this woke stuff is social constructivist, which is if you believe it, it's true. So there's a lot of tension between those two people. But I've met some decent communists. I just wouldn't trust them.
I'm in case you're wondering why I'm laughing. There's a gentleman in the comments that's just blowing you up. The things he's saying about you. Probably one of the ones that follows you he's a Marxist and he hates your anti-Marxism.
Oh.
This one's a good one.
Well, that's fine. I just made 2 videos about the situation in the UK. And I've had so many English people give me comments. Bless them. I think they were grateful that someone in Canada had a perspective that saw them. But not one of them thought I was English. It's only Canadians that think I have an accent. So I don't take that personally. I don't think I have an English accent either.
No, it's okay. He wants to come on the panel. Not going to happen, buddy. I guess in winding up the episode, if anyone's got any last minute questions, polite questions, you can write it in there and I'll ask Melanie. But yeah, I mean, do you have any message, any words of optimism or hope, or how to get through this and
I
for
don't
the
know.
dark
I think there
times?
may be lessons to be learned about how or the tactics that are being employed right now, because Trudeau is bad and what's happening with the media is bad. And we all see it, at least people, I'm sure, in the chat and in, you know, but it seems to me what's happening in the UK is on that, but on steroids. They're doing it, they're accelerating these things very, very, very fast. So I think it's worth watching what's going on to see if we can sort of spot maybe some tactics of what we might expect in the future and what we have to maybe look to fight against. I don't see much positive though coming out of it.
I'm just gonna go back to sort of what you and I both agreed on. Like we have to be more reasonable. Like we have to think these through. We can't just
Correct.
lean into this. God, what the hell did we just call it? Mass formation psychosis. Yeah, I think that's
Yeah,
what they're relying on.
I agree with you. I just don't know how I just don't know how to encourage that. I make videos and I just share information with people and I hope that they get engaged. I don't do it to rage farm. I try not to do that, even though it may happen sometimes, especially over the last few days. But yeah, you're right. We do. And I think that you do a really good job at doing that. I think you're a very calm person. I think you could talk to just about anyone who's willing to talk to you. So well
I
done.
have one suggestion for getting out of this, but people should follow you and your podcast. So how do they how do they get a hold of you?
Oh, my channel is called the Weekly Canadian Gender Wars Report. Long name. We're looking to rebrand and maybe we're going to change that shortly. But currently it's the Weekly Canadian Gender Wars Report. And at the minute, I'm kind of covering Britain stuff, so we're not covering as much gender stuff, although that will resume very shortly. And my Twitter handle is just on the screen there. Well, I believe it's on the screen for everyone at
Yeah.
FinkelDusty. Normally, I would put out lots of different source material from queer theorists in academia, or some of the things that I find in policies or some news in terms of gender ideology in Canada. That's kind of been my niche so far. So if you're interested in that, please, I don't know, please like and follow, as people say.
Yeah, guys, go ahead and follow her, Finkel Dusty on X, and she's doing some pretty good stuff. And she's way smarter than me when it comes to this Marxist stuff. That's why I don't like talking to her. I feel like she's talking down to me, but she's good on social media.
Well, I'm trying. We all try our best. I haven't put out enough material. So we have one thing I will say. We have a weekly. So there's a couple of things we do on the channel every weekend for the last year. Me and my partner Shannon, who is a boy, he is a man. We have a show, which is the report bit, and we cover some of the news or whatever's breaking in terms of gender and queer stuff in Canada. So people are informed about the stuff that they won't cover on the news, and we give a little bit of insight into those things. And then occasionally I'll put out some kind of analysis video looking at a particular topic. Like I said, right now, those analysis videos are pretty much what's going on in the UK. So if you're curious about some of this two-tier queer stuff that we talk about, I've covered 2 videos that are talking about the 2 tiers. By all means, go and have a look.
And in case my humor was lost on anyone, I was joking there. She doesn't actually talk down. I love following her. So Melanie, thank you very much for coming on. I mean, I had a blast. I think you gave a lot for the audience to chew on. So thank you very much.
Yeah, no worries. I loved it.
All right. Have a wonderful day.